Hi, I'm Lisa Crispin. It's great to join you virtually today. I'd like to share with you my journey along with my team into the world of continuous delivery, some of the obstacles we face and how we approached working around them. So I'm happy to share with you today. I've been lucky to work mostly on small cross-functional teams where we all pitched in on all the activities related to development, operations, etc., that whole infinite DevOps loop. I've been a hands-on tester on Agile teams for 20 years or so, and been very lucky to collaborate with Janet Gregory to write books and develop video course and our live course, which is available remotely as well as in person, Agile Testing for the Whole Team. And you can see that more about that at agiletestingfellow.com. And I've also got a Test Automation University course on test automation and DevOps, which is free, like all the courses on Test Automation University. It is awesome. And I enjoy driving and hiking with my donkeys in my free time here in Vermont. Please feel free to get in touch with me anytime. My contact information is there. And I currently work at OutSystems. I'm on the monitoring and observability team, helping to build an observability practice, among other things there. So I'd just like to share some of my team's experiences learning how to build quality into our product and succeeding with delivering small changes to production frequently at a sustainable pace, which is what continuous delivery is. So in my experience, you learn a lot more from failure than success. And so today I'm going to talk about a team I was on that would be seen as a pretty high-performing team with a lot of awesome developers, pairing 100% of the time, doing test-driven development and all the other extreme programming practices, automating tests at all levels. And we had been doing this for a while, and we finally got the infrastructure into place and moved our application to the cloud, and we had deployment pipelines, and we had blue-green deploys so that we had 2 production systems, one idle, one live, and we could deploy to the idle system and test it out before we flipped the switch and made that one live, and we could flip the switch back if anything bad happened. So we felt like we had a lot of infrastructure in place, and the managers decided they wanted to move towards continuous delivery by starting to deploy twice a week. And of course, this is a great idea if you're ready for it, because small changes, when you do more frequent changes, they're smaller, they're less risky, we can easily revert them. But honestly, at this point in this team's journey, we were not really even reliable at deploying every 2 weeks. So this seemed a little bit overambitious to me, but we forged ahead. Again, we had thousands of automated tests, unit level, API level, UI level, but we still had a manual release regression checklist of tests that we couldn't automate for various reasons. We only had a couple of testers for 25 to 30 developers. So that was hard. And going through that checklist, if you're a tester or you've done testing, you probably know, even if you're going through a checklist, you might notice something that's not on that checklist, but it looks weird. Now you've got to go to production and see if it's already a problem in production. It can be a big time suck, and that's what was happening for us. And of course, if you've done the regression checklist and tried to deploy and then something went wrong, so we're not going to deploy today, we're going to make a change and deploy tomorrow. Now we got to do the whole release regression checklist again. So it was just taken so much time that we no longer had time for adequate exploratory testing or other human-centric testing like accessibility testing. And these small changes were causing unexpected impacts in production, and it was kind of a mess. So our journey did not start very well. So how did my team turn this around? I'm going to tell you a lot of stories about it here, but reflecting on this together in our retrospectives, we all agreed that one of the big problems was we're not doing enough exploratory testing because we didn't have time. And trying to depend on 2 testers to do all that testing was not going to scale. So the first thing we did was to dump that manual release regression checklist. We just threw it away with not really adding value. And indeed, we never had any regression failures that would have been found with that checklist. So that was totally a waste of time. The management was really smart. The managers added exploratory testing skills to the matrix of skills that developers needed to advance up their career levels. So they had a lot of motivation. Not only did they want to prevent production problems, but also they would be rewarded by promotions if they got good at exploratory testing. So we held exploratory testing workshops for the team, everyone on the team, not only the developers, but designers, customer support, product owners. And we started pairing with the developers, which we'd wanted to do for years, but the development manager said, oh, don't slow our developers down by pairing them with testers. So by pairing with the developers as they wrote production code and designed their tests, doing test-driven development and automating tests, we could also show them how we could help them with designing better tests, and we could also show them how to do exploratory testing and catch a lot of problems sooner at the story level. So just working at a small increment, something that we were going to finish in 1 or 2 days, we could quickly find problems and have that really, really short feedback loop. So the developers took responsibility for exploratory testing at the story level. But of course, a feature is made up lots of stories, and you can't test everything just on one story. So at the epic level or feature level, we wrote exploratory testing charters using Elizabeth Hendrickson's template from her fantastic book, Explore It. And we put those in the backlog along with the feature stories so that when enough stories were done for an epic that we could test more holistically, then people on anybody on the team could take those charters and do those. So those were charters that focused on one aspect that took about 30 minutes to explore. And so this was one piece of the puzzle, and we indeed started to see things were a lot calmer. We deployed to production, nothing terrible happened. We didn't have so many unexpected outcomes. And mind you, we were having these weird impacts in production despite our thousands of automated tests, because we had a really complex single page application in JavaScript with a lot of logic in the code, and we had to support a lot of concurrent usage. The product was a project tracking tool. So it was just a really complex thing to try to test. So it wasn't our only problem. And one of the things that I learned this from Janet Gregory, when you have a problem, make it visible and talk about it. So I'm going to give some examples of ways to help talk about how to fit the testing into continuous delivery using some visual models and frameworks. So I learned about visualizing deployment pipelines from Abby Bangser and Ashley Hunsberger, and here's an example of what that can look like. And so you can lay your deployment pipeline out on cards on a table, or if you're not physically co-located, you can use Google Slide or Miro board or whatever, lots of collaborative tools these days. And so we all have some set of pipeline stages that our code goes through to get to production. They may be manual, they may be automated, they're giving feedback. And so as we move to the right here, we get more confidence. And so we can think about what's the value of each stage, how do we fit in things like exploratory testing, user acceptance testing, what's the best way to do this? Can we use release feature toggles to hide things in production, go ahead and deploy to production and not turn them on until we finished all the testing activities that need to be done. So I couldn't get my team to do this together. They wouldn't sit around and map the pipeline together, even though it's really quick. You can probably do it in an hour. But I did it myself. And as a result, I came up with a lot of questions, really good questions to go and ask the rest of the team. So we did make improvements to our pipeline. Now, all teams are hoping at least to automate some of their regression tests at different levels, unit level, API level, UI level, performance testing, all kinds of other testing activities. So think about your automated test suites. If you have any, you're relying on these tests. Can you really trust them? So in the case of the team I've been talking about, a lot of our UI level tests, and again, those were really important because we had a lot of logic in the UI, they were flaky. They were really hard to rate. There was a lot of timing issues, a lot of concurrency issues. And so we were not getting confidence from our automated tests. So here's an example of a framework that you can use to talk about your automated test suites and decide where you might need improvement, where you might need additional tests you might need to delete, because you know what? Writing an automated test doesn't mean you should keep it around forever. So I really like Ashley Hunsberger's Test Suite Canvas. She modeled that on Katrina Clokey's. Katrina Clokey has a fantastic book, Practical Guide to Testing in DevOps, available on LeanPub. And Ashley's Test Suite Canvas is just a great way to sit with your team, whether in person or virtually, and have conversations about your different automated test suites in your pipeline, or maybe ones you don't have yet. So we want to talk about what are we going to learn from each test suite, who benefits, how do they get their results, what risks are we mitigating, how can we make it reliable. I know this is hard to read, but it is downloadable, and I will make my slides available. So that's some of my favorite questions from the Canvas. I don't have time to go through a lot of them in detail. These are some of my favorite questions, and again, just to guide team conversations. It's really important to talk about when there is a failure in your deployment pipeline or your build process. Who's going to look at that failure? How will they know about that failure? Who's responsible for getting it fixed? So we have to talk about those things up front. And again, I couldn't necessarily get my team to go through the test canvas together, but I could go through it myself and then bring those questions to the team. It still happened. So I mentioned all the automated tests that our team had that were not preventing serious regression failures. And I started taking a look at the user interface tests, level tests, and of course I was pairing with developers, and the tests were they were all been written by developers without any input from testers. And you know, great that they took responsibility for automating those tests, but they were as good as they were at test-driven development and writing production code and unit level tests. They kind of were not that great at UI level tests. And some of the tests lacked assertions, like what are you testing? Mostly happy path. And so I was like, well, we need to make sure we got good coverage. So we got a cross-functional representational group of people together, some developers, a product owner, managers, testers, a customer support person, 10 people. You don't want to have more than 10. It's hard to have conversations with more than that number of people. Somebody drew our front-end architecture, which was really complicated, on the whiteboard, and we started talking about what are the most risky areas. And we started prioritizing them. So we marked them in red on the whiteboard and started making a list of what needed to be covered. And then we could go and look at the tests we had and see where the gaps were, see where we needed improvements, and prioritize. You can't fix everything at once. You can only do one little baby step at a time. So this gave us a roadmap of what we needed to do, and gradually we improved the feature coverage and started seeing fewer regression failures in production, something that's pretty easy to measure. That's just one way of talking about risks. There are lots of other ways. I'm a fan of risk storming with TestSphere cards, which you can find on Ministry of Testing shop. And also there's, I don't know the name of the website, something with risk storming in the name. It's available virtually as well. It can be virtually facilitated. Mind maps is one of my favorite ways to start. Let's just start thinking about our system and where our risks are. Traditional risk analysis, what's the probability that something might happen? What's the impact if it does happen? Even if it's highly unlikely it could happen, if it has a high impact and will cause customers a lot of pain, we want to make sure we prevent it. So again, do something visual with your team. It helps you think laterally, and it helps get ideas from multiple people, multiple viewpoints. But hey, what? We don't know like what might happen maybe more people will use our system at once than we thought, or maybe somebody will accidentally drop a table in production, or we update a configuration file incorrectly, or some API we're using to external system fails. There's a lot of things we can't even replicate in our test environments because today's distributed systems are so complex and hosted in the cloud. It's hard to replicate that. So if you don't know something's going to happen, you're not going to have alerts for it. Our monitoring dashboards, I think Charity Majors calls them the scar tissue of our previous production outages. Ooh, we had this problem, and so we added an alert or we added monitoring for it. What about the ones that haven't happened yet? So the answer to this is just instrumenting our code and collecting all the information that we need. We're lucky that today it's a lot cheaper to store data. So we can capture structured events of customer started here and did all these things and ended here, kind of a transaction, and follow what people are doing on our system. That lets us ask questions to our production system when something goes wrong, and we can diagnose problems really fast. Later on in my career, I was on a team that could do this really well. They did a great job of instrumenting the code, of capturing the events in a structured way, had great set of tools. So within a couple or 3 minutes, they could diagnose the problem in production. It was truly amazing. And it was pretty good because at the time we weren't that great with our automated regression test coverage there either. So what the team I was on that I've been telling you about, whenever we had a problem we didn't understand and we weren't logging that information because we never knew that would go wrong before, we just had to add instrumentation and redeploy. So then it's going to take, a day or two to get it out in production. That's terrible. So once we started learning about observability from people like Charity Majors and Cindy Sridharan and Abby Bangser, we started using we were already using tools like Mixpanel, analytics tools, Splunk, New Relic, Datadog, and we started realizing that we need to get more data logged so that we could use these tools to help us ask more questions. And again, this was a few years ago, so we didn't have so many tools available to us like Honeycomb and Lightstep today. But this is the direction we knew we needed to go as another way to be successful with continuous delivery. So quality, it's a whole team sport. So what makes it work? Well, I've been very interested in the past several years on unconscious bias, cognitive bias, things like confirmational bias. We see what we expect to see, which is really bad if you're a tester. Accessibility bias. Once you see something, you see it everywhere. We have a lot of scientific data today showing that teams with diversity are more successful. And so this is another way we have different perspectives, different experience, and that helps us see problems more clearly that we can solve. What's in the way of our goal, we can solve it. And on this team I was on, we experimented with having small teams delivering features more quickly, and we found a great way to do acceptance on these stories. When they had a few stories for a new feature ready to go, we would have these ensemble testing, or some people model on mob programming, ensemble testing sessions with the product owner, the designer, a customer support person, developers, and a tester. And within a half an hour, we could go through 4 or 5 stories. Any questions we had, the person was in the room to answer those questions, whether it was a design question, an error handling question, a functionality question. We could get that question answered right then and know whether we could accept or reject the story. And plus we had a lot of people contributing to that testing. So we were doing a good job of testing from different perspectives. This was a really successful way. We also obviously paired a lot too. So that's a great way to transfer skills and get those different perspectives. I really encourage you to build relationships. This is something Katrina Clokey talks about a lot in her book. If you're just transitioning to this DevOps culture, it may be uncomfortable if you've been working in silos. Now all of a sudden you're all working together. So we need to be willing to ask for help. We need to be willing to give help. I say do food. I don't know how you do that virtually, but we're humans. So get to know people at a human level. This is really important. I like to use principles to guide our work, and the continuous delivery principles, which you can find at continuousdelivery.com. Those are really good ways to mitigate risks and put more joy into your work. So, highly recommend this book as well, which I believe the book has just celebrated its 10-year anniversary and is still just as relevant today. And it's really all about testing. Use your retrospectives, find your biggest problem, design some small experiment that you could do in a week or two to make that problem less bad, measure it in some way, make a hypothesis, see if it works or not, and build on that knowledge. So start getting your team together. Talk about quality. What kind of quality do we want to achieve? What level of quality are we aiming for? What can we commit to doing because we know it'll be hard? And how can we fit these testing activities in and be confident for continuous delivery, continuous deployment, getting those small changes into production frequently, getting our whole team engaged in building quality in, making our code testable, operable, continuously testing, and watching out for our product in production, learning from production. So I have a few resources here. Thanks very much, and feel free to get in touch with me anytime with questions.